Hello guys and welcome back to Planet 40k. Today we're going to be talking about the pros and cons of playing Necrons, a faction that doesn't just fight wars, they endure them. In 10th edition, the Necrons remain one of the most resilient, beginner-friendly and visually striking armies in the game, but they're not without their flaws. Slow movement, predictable play patterns, and a meta position that hovers between solid and just okay. So in this video, I'm going to be covering the pros of playing the Necron faction, as well as the cons. We're going to be going through the 6 detachments, talking about their pros and cons, the current meta standings for Necrons in general, and finally, we're going to ask, should you be playing Necrons? So let's get straight into the pros of playing Necrons. Now pro number 1, you've got a lot of durability because of that reanimation. Now Necrons are amongst one of the toughest armies in Warhammer 40k, not necessarily the toughest but one of the toughest, very difficult to get rid of units, partly because of the reanimation protocols to be bringing back fallen models during the battle. What this means is opponents need to take out a unit one at a time to actually nerf our reanimation protocols, and sometimes that means they have to overcommit to taking out an entire unit, because the chip damage taken off one model at a time per unit isn't the way to go against Necrons. This gives you an incredible staying power on objectives and in drawn out missions. We've also got quite a lot of defensive mechanisms that will help with our reanimation and our staying power. The second pro of playing Necrons is the objective control and mid-board dominance. Now units like Necron Warriors, Lich Guard, Canoptic Wraiths, they can hold objectives for turn after turn after turn. They've got a lot of resilience that makes them very ideal for playing the mission rather than chasing kills. We don't necessarily need to table our opponent to win the game. Even when we're pushed off a point, reanimation will let them come back swinging. Number 3, simplicity and manageability. Straightforward rule set, very simple stratagems, usually makes Necrons quite easy to run effectively, which is obviously going to help for beginners especially, but also is very useful for expert players as well. Our focus is mainly built around movement, positioning and reanimation timing of course as well, not so much the micromanaging of combos. And we're also great for players who want tactical focus without rules overload. Number 3, easy to paint. I'm not the best painter, as you guys probably know, but out of all the factions that are going in the 40k game, Necrons are probably the easiest faction to paint. Metallic schemes are very beginner friendly, very forgiving. Dry brushing, washes and edge highlights create fast, impressive results, and Necron armies still look very cinematic with minimum effort. Number 5, I'm going with reliable shooting. Now we do have some melee in the Necrons faction, but I think we're more focused towards shooting over the melee side of things. We've got the Gauss and the Tesla weapon options, which offers a lot of flexibility with a lot of different ranges with those two weapons in particular. We've got heavy support like the Silent King, Doomsday Arts, Canoptic Doomstalkers. They hit pretty well when positioned well as well, and Necrons reward smart placement over sheer volume of shots. Although some of our shooting can be quite swingy, we do have a lot more in the shooting arsenal than we do within engagement range. Number 6, forgiving playstyle. Reanimation makes your mistakes less punishing. You can lose models within a unit but still recover and still gain momentum. You can even gain movement in fact from your reanimation protocols, especially with Necron Warriors for example, bringing them back, gaining inches and inches of movement every time you reanimate. Again, this is perfect for newer or returning players learning the fundamentals because it's very forgiving, and reanimation kind of gets you out of jail or lets you off the hook slightly, especially in the less competitive games. And then the 7th pro I've got for playing Necrons is favoured faction status. Now Necrons are one of the Games Workshop's flagship armies. Of course they're not Space Marines, that's the cash cow, but we're sort of the next tier below that alongside the Tyrannies. I mean, we've had the box set in 9th edition and we've had a few other mission decks where Necrons have been featured on the front cover. Pariah Nexus as an example. Necrons regularly get featured in not only the new editions but also the narrative arcs as well, and we often receive new kits, new updates, new rules attentions. I mean, coming up in the next year we're going to be having the Nightbringer coming out, a new Nightbringer model, but only just last year we had Orokin the Diviner, Imatech the Stormlord, we had the Overlord with the Translocation Shroud, just to name a few characters there. So they do keep attention on Necrons, which is a good thing if you were to play them. And because of all these new models, investing in Necrons is likely a safe long-term choice. They're not going to be replacing the new Imatech in the next 20 years, are they? There are a few models, a few units that they may replace, like the Catan Shard of the Deceiver, maybe the Locust Destroyers. So those ones are not necessarily the most safest, but there's quite a lot of newer models that are definitely safe picks if you were to go long-term with Necrons. Necrons. Right, that's the pros of playing Necrons. What about some cons? We've got to be realistic here. I am going to give it you from both sides of the coin. The first con of playing Necrons, well, the movement. The movement is very slow. Most infantry are moving just 5 inches. We've got very limited mobility tools. Okay, we do have a hypercrypt detachment. Yes, we've got the monolith, which is quite expensive. We've got a ghost arc that only allows warriors to go in and characters. We've got a night sight that no one really selects. And then there's a couple of deep strike options, but realistically, we're not the quickest compared to some other factions in the 40k game. So what I found personally is I'm often reacting rather than leading the engagement, unless I'm going for the no man's land with like Canoptic Wraiths or warriors to just sit and hold. But that's probably as far as I go with the majority of my army because it's quite slow. Number 2, inconsistent damage output. I believe that Necrons do rely on volume. We do have some big hitters at range like the Doomsday Arc, the Canoptic Doomstalker for example, those 2 in particular, but they're very swingy with the amount of hits. It's d6 plus 1. You go rolling a 1 or a 2, then you've not done enough because you still need to hit, you still need to wound, and there's still maybe an armor save to be made before any damage is actually done. Very swingy on some of our units. The other units that aren't so swingy don't have the volume like Locust Heavy Destroyers or the Trichomineers with the Silent King. They've only got like 1 shot per model. Even though they are quite reliable, they do generally hit and do generally wound, but if your opponent has got an invulnerable save, they're likely to, well, they're just as likely to block it as you are to hit and to wound them. And because you've not got the volume, it's only 1 shot per model, doesn't quite work out. So we're lacking that explosive burst damage that many armies do rely on. Number 3, limited list variety. Most competitive lists are running the same sort of units, the Silent King, Canoptic Wraiths, Doomsday Arcs, Ophidian Destroyers, Flayed Ones. They're kind of the same units keep appearing in competitive play. Maybe Necron Warriors as well for some people with Orokin the Diviner and a Royal Warden. But there's a lot of units within our codex that just don't get taken out a lot. They don't get played a lot. We're kind of limited if you want to play competitive. If you want to play friendly, not so much. You can literally bring anything to the table. You bring an obelisk out with a couple of monoliths and away you go. You can have some fun. Now on that same point, many units are just outperformed. Like you could bring some death marks, but you may as well bring a Hexmark Destroyer because the Hexmark Destroyer has lone operative. Even though they've both got deep strike, you're better off taking a Hexmark. So you're never going to really take those death marks, and the same could apply to Trike Praetorians. You may as well just take some warriors, or you may as well just take some Scorpion Destroyers or Lich Guard, something else. So what this does is it kind of tailor makes our list depending on the detachment, and then it can feel quite repetitive over periods of time. Number 4, overcost or inefficient units. We've got units that are either really good but they're very expensive, or some units that they're okay but they're inefficient, like monoliths as an example, very expensive. Nightbringers, very expensive. Really cool models, but you rarely see them on competitive play. Obelisks. Tesseract Bolt is one of my personal favourites, but realistically it's an overcost model that probably doesn't do as much as it should do in competitive play. And then number 5, reliance on synergy and auras. Like most armies, if you lose your character, your buffs are going to fall apart, but Necrons do rely quite heavily on our characters. When you've got a resurrection orb in a unit and you've got My Will Be Done, maybe you've got a Cryptek in a unit, key synergies are lost when characters are defeated. Whereas what I find with some other factions, they don't necessarily need those characters to be buffing certain units, like a Space Marine Hellblaster unit doesn't necessarily really need a leader to lead that unit. But Necron Immortals, I don't ever play 10 Necron Immortals without a leader. They're just not as efficient as they could be. I want to be throwing a Chronomancer in there or a Plasmancer in there just to tighten up what they can actually do and make them more reliable. Okay, so that is the cons. Next we're going to go into the 6 detachments. I'm going to talk about their focus, and then I'm going to go through the pros and cons for each of the 6 detachments. I'm going to start with the Awakened Dynasty, the Index Dynasty. What we started the edition with. It's built around reliability, survivability, boosted accuracy, and it encourages leaders to be used in most of our units. Now the pros of the Awakened Dynasty, well, the bonuses are pretty simple and they work across multiple units, because all you need to do is add a leader to a unit. So you could be adding a leader to Immortals, Warriors, Scorpion Destroyers, Locust Destroyers, Locust Heavy Destroyers, Lich Guard. There's quite a lot of units that you can throw a leader or 2 into the mix to give them those buffs for the +1 to hit with the command protocols ability. The detachment as a whole is very balanced. You could go down the melee route, you could go down the shooty route, you can go with some canoptic race with a technomancer, that's more melee driven and they can be going into the no man's land and doing their thing, or you could go really shooty, go 3 lots of 6 locust destroyers all with a locust lord, so you can kind of do what you want, or just go balanced. You can go some shooty, some anti-tank, everything, whatever you want. There's kind of leaders that can do all sorts, and there's even an enhancement which you can use for units within 6 inches, which is the phasal subjugator, and the unit that's within 6 acts as if it's being led, and that could apply to doomsday arcs, canoptic spiders, you name it, whatever's there, it can apply to them and they don't have to actually be led. There's some really solid stratagems in the Awakened Dynasty, 2 in particular that I really like. The Eternal Revenant stratagem to bring you back an infantry character from the dead. Very useful because that is one of our weaknesses, which we will talk about in a moment. So if your opponent does manage to pick off one of our characters that is leading the units, that is applying command protocols, the detachment buff, then we could be bringing that character back to keep that buff active. It also does apply to Illuminazares as well, which I always find that crazy that he actually is an infantry character and he's a bit of a beast, very hard to kill, so using that stratagem for him is an absolute no-brainer. There's also the Undying Legion stratagem, which I think is probably the best one. Allows you to reanimate after your opponent has finished making their attacks for a single unit, if you've lost a model that is. So having reanimation protocols gives you that extra boost of survivability in a different phase, and if you've got a reanimator nearby, you can double down on that with an extra d3 on that reanimation roll. And then there's excellent enhancements as well. The Dermal Bond, which is the 4+ feel no pain save. Now most of our leaders have got the 4+ invulnerable save anyway, so having a 4+ in one and then a 4+ feel no pain is pretty cool. And the Veil of Darkness, which is everyone's personal favourite, being able to teleport out of the battle end of your opponent's turn, bring them back into play. That could be really useful for some locust destroyers with a locust lord. Very reliable source of movement, as well as getting into range and getting all the buffs that they provide, which is all the rerolls of hit rolls. As for some of the cons, the buffs rely on the characters actually staying alive. Now I did mention there was a stratagem to bring those characters back, but if your opponent knows what they're doing, they're going to be going for your characters, so we're going to be weak to precision attacks. Now some units in the game have this inbuilt within their actual data card, but melee characters in particular you've got to really watch out for, because they can use the core stratagem, which is Epic Challenge. So all of their melee attacks now have precision. So those Technomancers leading the Canoptic Wraiths, he can be very easily taken out the game. Yes, you bring him back, but they can be taken out again the next phase, and then that's it. Your buffs are gone. The 5+ feel no pain save for your Wraiths completely gone, just like that. And command protocols doesn't naturally work on some of our better units. I did mention that we do have an enhancement, but that is only a 6-inch aura. But other parts of the battlefield that have different units, they're not all going to have leaders. Tomb Blades aren't going to have leaders. Triarch Stalkers aren't going to have leaders. Triarch Praetorians, Canoptic Spiders, none of those have leaders. So therefore they're not going to have any interaction with command protocols whatsoever. Next we've got the Hypercrypt Legion. This is the redeployment, repositioning, hyperphasing detachment, which is very useful for your mobility. It also can be built around a monolith. This is probably the only detachment that I would consider a monolith in, because it is quite heavily built around a monolith if you wanted to go down that route. Now pros for taking this detachment: very flexible for scoring primary as well as secondary cards, because you can pull units in and out all game long, and if there's an objective open you can just get back in from the hyperphase. And if you pulled a secondary card, maybe it's behind enemy lines, maybe it's area denial, whatever your card is, you've got the units that you've just put into reserves that can now do those cards, so it's very flexible for scoring your victory points. Deep strike units are very useful in particular because they can reuse that deep strike when they're hyperphasing, so Hexmark Destroyers, Deathmarks, Triarch Praetorians. There's also an enhancement in fact that gives deep strike to a unit, so it could be any unit in fact if they're being led with a leader with that enhancement, and that is the Austrioclave Fulcrum. So you could put that on, say, a Plasmancer, and then those Immortals that is leading now have deep strike. We've also got a 6-inch deep strike with any unit that hyperphased, and that could be any unit even if they've not got deep strike, but that's by using the stratagem Cosmic Precision, and it only requires us to be 6 inches away rather than 9. That's really useful again for those secondaries in particular. If there's no space and your opponent has screened out, you can use a throwaway single Locust Destroyer or a single Deathmark unit or Hexmark Destroyer unit. Yes, you're probably going to lose the model, but they can be a throwaway, and maybe you're playing fixed, maybe you're playing fixed missions, and you've got behind enemy lines and established locust, you throw a hex mark destroyer in the backfields, do the action with established locust and you're behind enemy lines. That's 7 points. Yes, you're probably going to die, but 7 points is a decent trade-off for 75 point model that they've actually still got to focus on and remove before continuing on. And also it's going to be forcing your opponent to screen more in their deployment area than they would like to for most of the battle. A lot of opponents, by sort of turn 3, when you've deep struck all your standard models in, they tend to leave their backfields because, you know, there's no way of you getting in through the back way. But because we can hyperphase in and out, opponents tend to have to keep their units in the back lines and defend their areas so that we can't deep strike freely, which means in the no man's land there's going to be less models and less units there that can actually kill our stuff, so we can swamp into the no man's land, get those primary objectives scored, and your opponent has to make a decision whether they come to the no man's land and leave their backfield open or do the opposite. Generally they can't do both. Now, cons for Hypercrypt Legion: well, your hyperphase units can't score primary if they're not on the board. That's one problem. If you've taken them off in end of your opponent's turn, well, they're going to be off the board in the command phase, so they're not going to be scoring primary. You also can't Cosmic Precision a Catan. They did nerf that quite a while ago now, so no monsters can use Cosmic Precision. The Monolith, they help with mobility, which I find isn't actually a huge problem in the Hypercrypt Legion. Yes, you've got the Eternity Gate and you can do a lot of shenanigans moving bodies in and out of the gate, but like I said, I don't believe we've got an issue with mobility in this detachment. This is our fastest detachment. I don't believe we need a Monolith, especially at the price that it is. And unfortunately, most of our stratagems are actually built around the Monolith. 4 of them are actually dedicated to the Monolith, and if you're not taking a Monolith, then you find that your stratagem usage isn't as strong in comparison to your opponent's stratagems that they're going to use against you. Now, the Annihilation Legion, this is mainly melee focus, mainly Scorpet Destroyers with the Scorpet Lords. Primarily it's Destroyer Cult units and Flayed ones, and it encourages forward pressure. Again, your Scorpet Destroyers right from the off. Now, the pros to having this detachment: you got that rerollable charge, is especially good with Scorpet Destroyers, of course, because that's what they want to do. They're going to be moving their 8 inches. They want that reliability, getting into engagement range to then slice and dice and then move on to the next target. We've got bonuses when charging targets below half strength, which gives you some sort of usage for other units like Locust Destroyers, Locust Heavy Destroyers, and also we've got a lot of melee stratagems in particular to enhance our already solid melee output. Now, as for some cons with this detachment, the main units we've got in this detachment are quite fragile. They've got no invulnerable saves. Scorp Destroyers, Locust Destroyers, Flayed ones, no invuns here, so we are quite a fragile glass hammer detachment. If we do get targeted, we will go down. Now, the abilities where below half strength bonuses come into play, very situational in my experiences, and usually not that needed. If a unit is below half strength and you've got a full load of Scorpet Destroyers charging in with a rerollable charge and lethal hits and mortal wounds on the charge with the Scorpet Lord, rerolling all the hit rolls, you tend to not need it because you've already got a very overpowered unit there. You're probably going to overkill, so that extra bonus of being below half strength, you get more stuff, it's not needed usually in my opinion. The detachment doesn't seem to favour shooty destroyers as much. Yes, you've got a little bit of AP bonus, but really it's all about the melee side of things. I believe they needed to change the detachment rule to benefit the shooty destroyers a little bit more, but that is what it is. And finally, the enhancements are slightly underpowered. There is one which is the Soulless Reaper, that's a decent one, but the others are pretty poor. The Obeisance Phalanx, this detachment enhances your Noble, your Lich Guard and your Trite units, giving them that +1 to wound roll against one selected unit in a battle round, which is worthy foes. So you're targeting a designated enemy unit every battle round. So obviously that's going to encourage you picking off your opponent's key pieces. So the pros of this detachment, you've got the +1 to wound, that can be a big deal. I mean, if you're strength 5 and you're going up against toughness 9 as an example, that's quite a big distance. Obviously you're going to be wounded on 5s, but with that +1 to wound, you're now wounded on 4. So it's almost like you've got the equivalent of strength 9. You've built that strength 5, it's like a +4 to your strength. Just like that, so +1 to wound is quite a big deal. This is also going to be great if your opponent brings a major unit. Maybe there's a Stomper, maybe there's Magnus the Red, maybe it's the Silent King and you're going up in a mirror match. If your opponent has got this showpiece unit that's within their detachment, it'll be great to take that unit out because that +1 to wound will be very useful. And of course we're going to be syncing quite well with the Silent King's aura buffs, rerolling hit rolls and wound rolls of a 1 with the +1 to wound roll. I think it's quite a nice way to go, and the Silent King is of course Triarch as well, so he'll be using these abilities on himself. Cons for this detachment: if your opponent's list doesn't have a standout unit, then this detachment has less value. Yes, you still get the +1 to wound against a standard unit. Maybe it's a Vindicator. Removing a Vindicator is still good, but it's not a big standout piece, so it's going to hold less value overall. Now, if your target has been destroyed or your opponent's hidden it or screened it off really well, then you're also losing your detachment's punch, because you're not going to be getting that +1 to wound if you can't see the model anymore. And then the final con, this is just something I wanted to throw in: the Catacomb Command Barge isn't a noble. It should be a noble, but it isn't a noble, therefore doesn't apply to worthy foes. The Canoptic Court is the 5th detachment we've got in the Necrons Codex. It's all focused around Cryptex and Canoptic units. We're going to be getting our rerolls within the Power Matrix, always rerolling ones, but potentially could be rerolling everything if the Power Matrix is unlocked. So we're going to be emphasizing area control, especially in the No Man's Land, because you need to hold at least half the objectives in the No Man's Land to have that as our Power Matrix, and the same applies to our enemy DZ as well. So this is of course emphasizing that area control. You want to be taking at least half the objectives in the No Man's Land, which is quite an aggressive approach if you think about it. Now the pros: you can share keywords from leaders to bodyguard. If you have got Orokin the Diviner and you've got some Necron warriors, they're all going to share the Cryptic keyword that Orokin has. So therefore your Necron warriors that are shooting will get the rerolls from the Power Matrix because they're sharing keywords. Secondly, you get twice the reward for holding objectives. So not only do you just get the primary victory points, but you're also unlocking your Power Matrix, which is unlocking your detachment buffs. So twice the reward for playing the game, quite literally. Number 3, we're forcing opponents to fight toe to toe in the No Man's Land. In most detachments I don't like that, but when you've got a load of Canoptic Wraiths, maybe you've got 2 bricks of 6 Canoptic Wraiths, maybe you've gone for 3 bricks of Canoptic Wraiths. They're very hard to kill, especially with the Technomancer, so forcing them to fight toe to toe against units that do not break that easily. And we've got a decent amount of OC, their base sizes are quite big, so if you can get onto the objective and stop your opponent from getting their feet onto the objective with their units, then we're fighting toe to toe, not dying as much but still scoring points and unlocking the Power Matrix. And we've got some reactive stratagems which I quite like in the game as a whole. Reactive subroutines is a good one to be able to move away. Enemy units get within 9 inches of a Canoptic unit and we can make a normal move of 6 inches, maybe get out of range, maybe get out of charge range. And there's also the counter-temporal shift for a Canoptic unit. Can't be attacked at range unless they're within 18 inches. So you can kind of use those 2 reactive stratagems together, one in your opponent's movement phase, one in your opponent's shooting phase, and they can literally block out your opponent from targeting a Canoptic unit. As for the cons for the Canoptic Court, units outside the Matrix are going to suffer. If you're not within the Power Matrix, or you're not got the Canoptic keyword or the Cryptic keyword, well, you're kind of not getting the buffs and bonuses that you need to get. And if you've not got the Power Matrix unlocked in the No Man's Land, well, you're probably losing at this point already. So you need to get back into play, get the No Man's Land under control so that your units are not going to suffer. The units that you're going to use are going to be very funneled. Other than the Canoptic Doomstalkers, Canoptic Wraiths, Cryptex, maybe Warriors and Immortals, it's kind of one-dimensional. There's only sort of one playstyle. There's only certain units that you will take within the Canoptic Court because of the buffs and bonuses. Like you're not going to take a Trike Stalker. You're likely not going to take the Locust Heavy Destroyers because they're not getting the buffs and bonuses. You're better off taking Doomstalkers, which are weaker, but with the rerolls they're actually quite efficient in this detachment. But as a whole, the game plan is quite one-dimensional. Then the final detachment is that Star Shatter Arsenal. This is focused on vehicle and mounted units, mobilizing them all with assault. Generally revolves around the Silent King or a Command Barge as a key unit within this detachment because of the buffs and bonuses that they provide. We're encouraged to bring heavier list builds with this detachment. Pros: we're assisting with removal of enemy units holding primary because you get that +1 to hit against units on objectives. Very handy, very useful. Stop your opponent from scoring is the name of the game. Most vehicles have a 4+ invulnerable save, so we're going to have some durability within this list, whether it's Doomsday Arcs, the Silent King, Annihilation Barges, Trike Stalkers, Ghost Arcs, whatever. We've got 4+ invulnerable saves pretty much all round, all except for the bigger stuff like the Monolith, but that is Titanic anyway, so it's not going to get the buffs provided, and the Flyers, but we don't really care about the Flyers. We've got the mobility with Assault in this detachment. Our heavier hitters are generally vehicles and mounted units within our codex anyway. Again, Doomsday Arcs, the Silent King, Locust Heavy Destroyers, the Locust Destroyers. These are all generally the heavy hitters, so they are going to be vehicles or mounted, so they're all going to have assault. And then we've got some solid enhancement options. One particular one that I wanted to mention is Dread Majesty, which you just put on the command barge. Basically makes him a baby Silent King, rerolls of hit rolls and rerolls of a 1 for all units within 6 inches of a command barge. Very useful when surrounded by 3 Doomsday Arcs as an example. As for cons, there's some very expensive stratagems within this detachment that cost you 2 CP. There's a -1 to wound stratagem, there's the +1 to wound stratagem. 2 command points I think is quite hefty. I don't like 2 CP stratagems, I tend to not have enough for them, and the only way to really be able to afford 2 CP stratagems is when you take Imitek the Stormlord, because he provides CP every battle round, because he's a CP farm, but that in itself is a tax for 100 points. And also, terrain can be an issue for vehicle heavy lists, especially Games Workshop terrain. There's a lot of terrain on the battlefield, and other gaming mechanisms have even more terrain on the battlefield, so moving around the board with pivots and things like that and trying to stay within auras of the Silent King and the command barge can be quite tricky. We do have a stratagem to go through terrain with a unit, but that's another CP down the drain if you wanted to do that. So that is the 6 detachments, a quick focus as well as the pros and cons. Next I'm going to go into the meta. Where are Necrons currently in the meta? And this is just currently, right now we're in middle of October 2025, and this is kind of roughly where we're at. So currently we're a mid-tier faction. This week we've got 51% as our win rate for Necron players. So that's not a dominant faction, but it's playable. It's in the mid ballpark, isn't it? It's fine. It's not dreadful, but it's not going to be winning competitions. The Silent King, Doomsday Arcs, Canoptic Wraiths, they remain a stable core in pretty much every list. They're going to be in every list. You can maybe swap out the Silent King with a barge in some lists, but Doomsday Arcs and Wraiths are pretty much the go-to. So if you were to start purchasing Necron, that's where I would start personally after the box sets. What we struggle against is high mobility, armies that can move around. I come across Chaos Demons very often, and they're an absolute nightmare to deal with because they can be everywhere and everywhere, and I tend to struggle because of that mobility. We're also struggling against hyper lethal armies that literally do not give a damn. They will just shoot you down quite quickly, whether you've got an invulnerable save or not, whether you've got a feel no pain save or not. They might have precision, whatever, they just take you down quite quickly. They're the armies that we tend to struggle against right now. For our strengths though, strong mission play army, we're winning on objectives and endurance, not so much on alpha strikes. That's not really our play. We're there for the long haul, we're there all game, enduring in the no man's land, soaking up and holding points. Which means we're good into objective heavy matchups. If you come up against an opponent that also wants to do a similar thing and they go clashing with our Canoptic Wraiths in the no man's land, I'm okay with that. So the final question is, should you play Necrons? If you are a new player and you're considering Necrons, or maybe you want a second army and you're looking at Necrons in that manner, well, this is my opinion here, just me. The ideal Necron player, you're going to be enjoying the methodical gameplay, holding ground, grinding your opponent down over time. You prefer reliability over randomness, so you're not into the orc craziness or the chaos demon craziness. You're into reliability. Probabilities is probably a big thing for you as well, because you want an army that performs consistently. You're going to like the idea of a force being tough to kill because we can get back up with reanimation protocols. You don't want no glass hammer stuff which just falls down to a stiff breeze. You appreciate clean army mechanics, minimal rules confusions, low upkeep and logical synergy. To be fair, our codex is pretty straightforward. There's not too much going off, there's not too many extra things that you can add and take off of units. A lot of the time it is what you see is what you get, apart from one weapon changed here and there. I think our Tomb Blades are probably the most complicated we go, and that's not even that complicated. You're just throwing an extra piece of war gear on. So if you want a nice simple straightforward faction, Necrons is definitely the one. Now where I think Necrons may not be for you, if you want speed, mobility, hyper aggression, alpha strike, then Necrons are not for you, because we are deliberate, we are slow. You may as well go for something else that has a bit more of an alpha strike to them. If you're craving complex combos or high skill micromanagement, again, Necrons are quite simple by design. If you want to dominate tournaments right now, a lot of people do want to go into tournaments and win, and there's nothing wrong with that at all. It's not my bag, but if some people do just want to win and they enjoy winning, that's fine. Necrons at this moment in time isn't the place to go if that's what you want. And if you prefer armies with different things like psychic powers, mutations and just general randomness, again, Necrons isn't for you. We don't have any psychic abilities, we don't have chaos spawn and mutations. and there's no Orc Wars. We don't have random Eldari battle tokens, or Acts of Faith from Sisters of Battle, or Blood Tithe points from World Eaters. We're not about that. We are definitely not random, and there's no Psychic here. So guys, that's my pros and cons of playing the Necrons in a nutshell. Make sure you're subscribed, and I'll see you next time.